Welcome to Fairy Tale Access, where the head fairy's quest is to prove that fairy tales do exist in actual time rather than once upon a time. Together, we will unravel the heroes, young and old, who turn dreams into reality. These are the people who still believe in happily ever after. The discoveries will bend even our most cynical non-believers into believing in fairy tales. Hi, welcome to Fairy Tale Access. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to my guest, Reut Barak. She's an adventurer, writer, online influencer, and currently we're going to see her on Skype from Scotland. Hi, how are you?
Hello, how are you?
Oh, good. How are you?
I'm good. What's it like in your weather right now?
It's nice today. It's a little cool. Probably like Scotland. Is it cool there today?
It's freezing and it's raining. It's strong Scottish weather.
Okay, it's not that bad. It's just cool today. Thank you so much for being here. So first, you're a little bit of an adventurer.
Yes,
And
I've been around.
Just a little bit. You started out in Israel.
Yeah, so I grew up in Israel, and as a kid, I was also a little bit in the US. And then as an adult, I've also lived internationally, and now I'm in Scotland.
Wow. How did you end up in Scotland?
It's a bit of a long story. So I am quite inspired by this place, and the first time I saw something this beautiful was right after military service in Israel, when I went hiking in New Zealand, and I fell in love with nature, and I found it to be quite an inspiration, and I think relevant to what I do now. When I was there, it was right when Lord of the Rings 3 came out, and it was terrible finding accommodation, and everyone was there at the same time. And what shocked me was, having seen these movies, how beautiful real nature is in New Zealand. And when I did Milford Track on the last day, everyone who did it agreed that if we had one more day, we would also get inspired to think of fairies and think of hobbits, and that we understand why they chose that as the location. And when I came here for the first time, I saw the mystic castles, the ruins of civilizations that were here before us, and I thought, I wonder what that was like. I wonder what their folk was like. I love the Celtic myths, and I love how you walk here and there's mossy trees, and it makes you think. It's not a surprise that there's so many fairy tales here. It's not a surprise to me that this place is associated with all this culture, and I think that I did have quite a few travels in my life. I also lived in Berlin for 3 years, and I think that of all the places that I've been to, this one was the one that inspired me the most. And I think I learned a lot about culture throughout my path. I met people from all over the world, and I've been very lucky to do that. Like I was lucky to do the things that I loved in life, and to be always inspired, I think.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So what inspired you to write your, okay, they are funny fairy tales, but they are a little sarcastic. And I think they center more on what young people are concerned with today. For instance, go ahead, start with Snow White.
Start with Snow White. So when I was living in Berlin, I was babysitting one of my friend's kids, and she wanted me to tell her a story. This is 5 years ago. And I thought to myself, okay, I'll tell her the story of Snow White. But then when it started, I thought, is this really the moral I want this girl to have? That it's all about beauty, or, it's all about that competition between the two women, and that Snow White nearly dies for it. And I thought, what if I made Snow White ugly instead? Like an ugly Snow White child who's brilliant. And when she grows up, she's plain, but she's very talented. And the kid just loved it. Like she wanted me to tell it to her again and again. And the other aspect was the dwarfs. So when we reached the dwarfs, I thought, how boring and how biased, 7 dwarfs. Let's give them talent. Let's give them something else. So I thought, okay, what professions does she know? Let's practice a little bit. So the first one would be a doctor. Okay, doctor. The second one would be a gardener. And after a couple of times of telling the story to a kid, I once came home and I thought, well, why don't I make a short story version for adults and make one of my friends laugh? So this was originally an email, and I got a really good response. And then a few months ago, I suddenly thought, what if, what if I could do this the way I did it in a story form on Kindle in a way that is like me telling it to someone. And what that meant was that the story would have to break across pages. It would start with, it's like, if you think about it, it's just like an app where you have like the app and then you swipe. So you swipe a long time ago, swipe in a faraway land. There lived a mirror named Shraga. So the idea is that people can play with it, and it's not like a regular book. And when I showed this first to Kindle Direct Publishing, they were quite excited, and it took 2 months to get the formatting right, and I had an amazing formatter, so we went back and forth, and Kindle were really supportive. And it's finally out, and it finally does what I wanted it to do, and it's different for every person that reads it. So some people flip very fast and giggle. Some people stop at every page and think about depth of what it means. And I think I wanted each one of them to have something that's deeper. So Snow White is about talent, and Cinderella is about courage. It's about that ability. It's more than a rags to riches type makeover. It's about this girl who is very closed, and she has to venture out into the world and have an experience and be adventurous. And Red Riding is about reputation. It's about what happens when you're being accused of something you didn't do or something that does not relate to you. And I think that talks a bit more to people nowadays. Everybody knows the stories, and I kept true to the Grimm. So I always look at both the Grimm fairy tales and the Disney. And I make sure that I stay true to what the original story is, but I like to build around it, and I like to be able to give something new.
Absolutely. I love the way Cinderella came out. It touches a little bit on mental illness.
Yes.
And the discrimination was really well laid out in Red Riding Hood. Really did a good job with that.
Red Riding Hood is my favorite fairy tale of all times. So when I was a little girl, I would have wolf nightmares. And I would go and I would wake my parents up and tell them that I can't sleep because of the wolf. And one day my parents decided that it's time that I saw what a real wolf is and I wouldn't be afraid anymore. So they took me to the zoo. And unfortunately, in the zoo in Israel, a wolf is something. See, I was dreaming of husky, big impressionist kind of picture wolf. And, but, it did work for them, because when we came home, I thought, well, clearly they have no idea what a wolf is. So I never disturbed them again. And when I grew up, I understood the depth of what Red Riding Hood is. And I actually read Freud's interpretation of dreams, the whole thing.
Wow.
And I think the idea that there is the darkness, the sensuality in child's dreams fits perfect with this one, because I think the wolf does symbolize this sort of unknown kind of appeal, a mystery man. And I love the modern adaptations. Whenever there's one coming out, I always see it. I love the Amanda Seyfried one, where nobody's good and nobody's bad. They're all human. And the wolf is a bigger theme. And if you think about it, in the original Grimm version, the only thing that the mother tells Red Riding Hood is don't run off into the woods, because she gave her a bottle of wine to bring to her grandmother, and she doesn't want the bottle of wine to break. And the distance is half a league, which is a little less than 2 miles. So you have a little girl all alone in the woods for 15, 20, maybe 30 minutes. And the only instruction she has is don't get off the path. So this is already kind of in that direction of growing up, becoming independent. I think there's a lot more of a woman to Red Riding Hood than there is that little naive girl. And if she's a woman, then that gets a different relationship with the wolf. Now, when I had to think about how to write the wolf, I wanted the wolf to be a very deep character. This was the first time I ever had any writing blocks whatsoever. I started writing it, erased the whole thing, came back the next day, same problem again. At some point, I just started doing it in pieces. So I did the beginning, I did the end, I did the middle, then I started doing parts of it. And I think the minute I figured out the wolf, that solved the problem, because that to me was the most important bit. In my stories, it's very important to build a lot more color, to build the characters, like Shraga, the sarcastic mirror from Snow White that everybody loves because he hates the queen, and there's a counter interaction there. So for the wolf, my inspiration were two people that I actually knew. So they're two men who are older than me, and they were an inspiration for me in life. The first one I actually met quite recently on one of my hikes, and he is what I would call a man of the world, someone who's well-traveled, has a different perspective of life, goes out into the wild. He's a professional hiker. And he actually, we talked about the fact that I wanted to write these series, and he was encouraging. And to me, that those two conversations I've had with him about this kind of inspired me when I came to write Red Riding Hood to base it a little bit on him. So to give something that is mature, knowledgeable about the world, and has this mystery, but also a very warm type experience, someone who's kind. And the second one was someone who used to be my mentor a couple of years ago. And he, to me, was a rock, someone who is made of steel, has seen life, has done a lot, has been very successful. And one day he was accused of something he didn't do, and he faced that with so much courage and so much power. And I felt very inspired by that. And in this story, Red Riding is a celebrity who loses her fame, and the wolf is someone who's accused of something they didn't do. And they both have that in common, that theme of a reputation. And I think in today's world, it's a lot more than it ever used to be, because we're so international. If something happens and it's all over the internet, it's not like it used to be that you could just go live in another city, maybe a couple of hours away, and nobody knows you, and you start over.
Right.
And I think it's a big theme in our time.
Absolutely. Now, tell us about some of these adventures that help influence you. What is snappling in Israel?
What is
No, snappling.
Well,
Snappling.
snappling. It's how we call it. I'm sorry, but I've never tried calling it in any other language. So essentially, you start off from a rock, and you're tied to someone who's helping you. And essentially, you start going down the slope of a little mountain, and you have to kind of jump like this. So you're pushing your weight out, and then you pull the rope, and it's a kind of fun, relatively safe, adventurous type experience. I sent you a picture. This was the first time I asked to have all the weight on me, because based on how they tie the ropes, they can make it a little easier, and I wanted to see what it was like for real.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
How'd it turn out?
Turned out I'm still here. No, I usually go for things that are a lot easier, like just walking up a mountain, and that's safe on a good tourist path. And I don't run away from the path.
What about Loch Ness? What was that like for you?
Loch Ness. Long. So I saw Loch Ness on the way between Inverness and Isle of Skye. And I was just sitting on the bus, and I think I actually looked at it, fell asleep in the middle, woke up, and it was still there. And I thought to myself, this is one of the most inspiring places in the world because of the whole Nessie myth.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about it, it's a beautiful lake. There are prettier lakes in Scotland. And yet it's the one that's the most famous because of this sort of very special story around it. And one of the things that I like, there's a huge castle there that's been kept quite well. And Scotland has a history of clans and a history of buildings that have been neglected over the years. And they kind of stand in these I wouldn't even say Gothic, but it's sort of ruins that are.
They're really amazing when you walk through them, and I don't know. It's just like walking back in time sometimes.
Yes, and the visitor centers are usually so good, and they give you the ability to imagine it based on what it really was, and they tell you some of the uses of these castles. And I actually prefer them. So as a tourist, I have seen castles that are currently functional, and you can see it from inside, and it's quite impressive. But to me, imagining what it could have been is a lot more inspiring. It's like it's magic.
I know, it really is. It's just a beautiful country, and it's so green.
It's so green, yes.
It must have been a big change for you from Israel.
Well, there have been a couple of changes on the way. So from Israel, I did my bachelor's in music. I'm a trained opera singer. And I decided that I would like to sing in churches. And I went to Berlin, where it's a great place to do it. And it's amazing to sing in churches. It's like singing in the bathtub. You have that echo, and everything you do sounds so great. And when I was there, that was already a very green country. It's also quite impressive with its green awareness. So I lived there for 3 years. They have everything. They have recycling. They have programs. The way Berlin is built, it's a planned city in terms of modern architecture. So, for example, a couple of years ago, they shut down one of the major airports and turned it into a park. And there are regulations around how much you're allowed to build there, because they want the airflow from the park to bring fresh air into the city. Wow. So it's quite
impressive.
It's quite a modern. It is. And then from a modern new type city, I went to a very old city again. So after reaching my peak in music, I got an audition where I would sing Haydn's Creation, double solo role, which is extremely difficult, both musically and physically. It's over an hour net of singing. To compare, a normal opera role is about 15 to 20 minutes net of singing. I suddenly realized that I kind of hit my peak in a sense. I couldn't possibly ever do anything more difficult. I could do bigger things in bigger places. And then I thought, well, there are other things that I like. I like the business part of it. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice if I applied to a big university this time, and I got a scholarship, and I got to study business for a year. And I got to go to Oxford.
That must have been amazing.
It was hard.
I'll bet.
Many hours in the library. But what I like about Oxford, and I think not many people know this, but the city is 800 years old. And everything you see is used. So you go see this place that looks like a Gothic palace, and it's really a library. And it's open to the public. It's open to students. Everything is always used. It's an alive old city, and I think it's very welcoming. And I think it's also got that history of the genre. So Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, or C.S. Lewis, Narnia. They were both Oxford professors. They were friends. And they would like to meet in this pub called the Eagle and Child, which they like to call the Bird and Baby. And they have their own table there, which you can sit at. So everything is kept in great condition. You can visit the places that your heroes used to live in and drink in back in the day. So it's quite an inspiring place. And then I wanted to go hiking. It was the first time I was ever in England. And I asked one of my friends, and she said, you should go to Scotland. So I came up here for 2 weeks, and then I fell in love.
Wow. And then you moved there.
I moved there 2 years later. I was convinced that it would be better for me to stay because everyone said that you should stay around the London area. But my heart was here, and I followed it.
That's fantastic.
It was.
So, what was your favorite book of all time growing up?
Definitely Call of the Wild. So for me, when I first read it, I thought, I can't believe that this book has actually been written. So Call of the Wild describes the adventures of Buck, who is a sort of half wolf, half dog, but mostly dog, who goes out into the wild and switches masters as he goes along. And he discovers the more primitive side of being, of his ancestry. And he becomes a great wolf. And it comes as, so there are two stories that Jack London wrote, Call of the Wild and White Fang, and they are opposite. So White Fang is, again, a half dog, half wolf that becomes an inhibited nice dog, whereas Buck from Call of the Wild, he becomes a glorious beast. And to me, that's it's my favorite book. I've read it half a dozen times, and I would probably read it half a dozen more in the next 10 years. And I love how there are scenes where our world is described the way it used to be. So when Buck looks into the fire and he, instead of his master, he suddenly sees a more primitive man and a more primitive life when the world was young. And I think, again, it's that inspiration of folklore, of where we come from, I think this is what fairy tales are really about. If you look at the Grimm and Disney fairy tales, there's two things that are guaranteed. One, there's going to be magic. And two, there's going to be a happily ever after. And when I think about that, that is what makes a fairy tale. But the magic part, it's actually so part of that world that it hardly happens. You accept it, and that's why it's so real to us. So if you think about Cinderella, in the original Grimm, it's a tree, or in the Disney version, it's a fairy godmother. Cinderella did not really need that. She was already ready to go with her own dress. Maybe she would have missed this prince, but she was capable of taking care of her own destiny. And that's where magic intervened. It's just a catalyst. Or when you think about Snow White, well, there's good camouflage in a poisoned apple, but you don't really need magic for that. And that's what makes it so believable, because it's just part of that world. It's just always there.
And I think you really bring that into everything that you do in real life. You bring that
Yes.
magic in, trying new things, trying new places. Getting accepted to Oxford, hanging out with
Oh, yeah.
penguins.
Yeah, I went and fed penguins in the in the zoo here in Edinburgh, and I think it's called Magic Moments, and it really felt that way. I will never forget that, and they are so human. They, you give them the fish, and they come and they run to you, and then they don't eat it. They try it, and then they go disturb another penguin who wants to eat the fish.
Wow. What advice would you give young people to help them realize their dreams and take advantage of all their abilities and try everything new?
Um, be impatient. So a lot of times I think what stops people, and I have spoken to a lot of people. I have actually a game that I play called Magic Wand, where I help someone understand what they really want. And it's like, if I gave you all the money in the world, I have a magic wand, there it is, you have all the money in the world, what would you do? What would you do differently? So it's usually questions around time, money, and caring about what other people are saying or thinking. And what I find is that it's always about, I will get it if I have this and this and this and this. I will get it when something like that happens. There's always a kind of criteria that you're waiting for something to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And in reality, the more you do of something, the better you get at it, the more opportunities come along. You have to just try. And if you don't try, the answer is no anyhow. So I think my advice is be impatient. Don't wait. Try,
Exactly.
go for it, do something now. It doesn't have to be big. I mean, when I first did this, I wanted Kindle, but I didn't know how to go about that. And then someone told me that this particular format already exists in iBooks. So I just put it out there. And then I was committed to it because it wasn't good. It needed editing, it needed formatting. But I had to now, I had something out there. So I had to step up and do that. And that's when it occurred to me that I want to be the best at this. I don't want to, I don't want any reader to be unhappy to say, oh, I could have gotten a better version of this thing. What is this? So I decided that I will contact the people who know exactly how to do this. And I wrote 9 women who have written millions of copies, have sold millions of copies online. And 4 of them replied, yeah, so, try, you might get a yes, yeah. And one of them sent me to a book. Her name is Jacinda Wilder. She is a best-selling author. She has an amazing story of how this helped save one of her kids to be able to be a writer and have that money. And they both wrote together as a couple. They have 5 children, and they were teachers, and now they are millionaires. And she was, she's part of a group of independently published authors who wrote a book about how to do it. Now, they didn't just write how to do it. They wrote the names of the people that they were using, and that's how I got my copy editor and my formatter. And they also talk about the importance of cover design. So I got a professional cover designer. And because I had already taken the first step, I was forced to take the second step and then the third step. So, tying back to the advice, be impatient. Take that first step now.
Excellent advice. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your insights, and we'll look forward to seeing more of what you're up to.
Yeah, the next one's Hansel and Gretel by popular demand. There was a big poll on Facebook, and that's what people wanted. So Hansel and Gretel is the next one.
That'll be interesting. What's the lesson in Hansel and Gretel?
Ooh, I'm going to have to think about that one. It's still in planning.
Okay, I can't wait. Well, thank you again.
Thank you very much. It's been lovely.
Oh, it was a pleasure. And until next time, keep asking questions, and a little impatience or a lot can pay off. We'll see you soon.